sales and marketing has to function as a singular unit. And it's part of this conversation that we watch play out where people are talking about, well, how much budget does marketing get? What percentage of the overall budget is going to marketing? And that gets trimmed when economic times get hard. Time and time again, I watch that not be the case when sales and marketing are actually integrated and functioning together.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Blandvertising. Bland advertising. It's a word I coined 13 years ago to describe a wishy-washy marketing claim. The type of words that fill a copy block, they look right. It's probably sprinkled with words like scalable, ecosystem, user-centric, best in class, leading, and on and on. But after you read blandvertising, or you hear it, you realize it doesn't really say anything at all. So I love this lesson I read in a podcast guest application. A brand that says something is more important than saying everything perfectly. It's so true. Here to share the lesson behind that story, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Millie Hogue, the CMO of Hakkoda, an IBM company. Thanks for joining us, Millie.
Happy to be here.
Great. Well, let's take a quick look at your background so people know who I'm talking to before we jump into all your lessons. Millie started her career as a content writer for Company.Politics, woman after my own heart. She led the demand generation marketing at Symphony AI. She was director of demand gen and head of B2B marketing at Medbridge. And for the past 3 years, she has been at Hakkoda. Hakkoda is part of IBM, and IBM reported total annual revenue of $62.8 billion in 2024. She manages an internal team of 9, along with an array of 20 vendors and freelancers. So, Millie, give us a sense. What is your day like as CMO?
This is always one of my favorite questions because I think every single day looks different. But there's, I would say, like a total split. I am either at home in my office and I'm waking up every morning and you've got the litany of Zoom calls and you're jumping from conversation to check in on different statuses. And then there's the CMO show that's on the road. So that's when I head over to the Denver airport and hop on the plane and go and get to do my favorite thing, which is meeting with clients, meeting with partners, starting to understand from the front lines what's happening in the marketplace. So 2 very different ways that my day can shake out, both wonderful.
I've never heard it talked about that. I'm thinking of a baseball team. Like here's the baseball team, like at home. Here's how when we're at Coors Field, here's how we handle things. And then on the road, we handle things differently. I like that. All right, well, let's take a look at some of the lessons from your career. As I mentioned before, I've never really worked in another industry. I've never been a podiatrist or an actuary or whatever. But I feel like we get to make things. That's a really cool thing we get to do. And so let's take a look at some of the lessons from some of the things you made. You said a marketing and sales team divided cannot stand. I vaguely remember this lesson from history class in high school. How did you learn it? And what did you mean by it when you were trying to build something along with your sales team?
Yeah, it's a blatant rip-off of Abraham Lincoln, but true nonetheless, which is to say that, man, I think more than ever in 2025, and certainly for the years to come, sales and marketing has to function as a singular unit. And it's part of this conversation that we watch play out where people are talking about, well, how much budget does marketing get? What percentage of the overall budget is going to marketing? And that gets trimmed when economic times get hard. Time and time again, I watch that not be the case when sales and marketing are actually integrated and functioning together. So I like to think of it as 2 ways that this can really play out. One, you've got a marketing team who's like, I'm marketing, I'm not sales. I'm totally over here in a different corner. I'm doing my thing. And sales is over here on the other side of the house. And they're trying to prove their own value, to track their own deals. And that's when things fall apart. So I've had experiences in my career where I walked into a sales and a marketing team. And as you heard, my background is demand gen. And so I am constantly being asked to kind of go through and prove out the value of the campaigns that we're playing, tie that into pipeline. If you've got a smart CEO in charge, they're also looking at how that pipeline turns into revenue and tracking that all the way through to the end. But I walked into this situation and we had some really fantastic sales leaders. Unfortunately, they had built this comp structure that was based around who ultimately sourced a deal. And I mean, you can probably speak to this. You talk to marketers all day long, but who sources a deal in this day and age is such a tenuous question because we both know there are 17 to 30 plus touches along the way that influence that person before they get into a deal phase. If you're talking a really high ACV opportunity, probably even more than that. Some of those are happening in the dark funnel. You can't track it at all. And so we got down to this, and what you're really asking is not who sourced the deal, sales or marketing, but who sourced 51% of that, right? Because somebody else had the other 49. And that was just an incredibly fraught question that, having to sit there and answer every single week who sourced this deal and going through every single one of the engagements and asking that question because it was tied to an individual person's compensation. Super important when somebody's being comped that way, but absolutely the wrong question to be asking for sales and marketing leaders. It just put us in this totally combative position where I'm over here with my CMO, the CRO's over there with their VP of sales, and we're both kind of sitting there arguing for who did more instead of asking the question we should have been asking, which was, how did we do this together? We're sitting here with a list of opportunities, phenomenal, good stuff. What's creating those? What are the different touches along that life cycle? And how do we do more of that? So I think there are just, wrong moves that can be made often very early in a company's growth. This was a startup that was, they were 10 years down the line at this point, but they had matured from this tiny little baby company when maybe that question made sense. I don't know. I wasn't there for it. But certainly at this stage of maturity, it didn't. And not being able to focus as a sales and marketing team on the togetherness of how you're bringing a lead into that opportunity phase and then into revenue for your business was just cataclysmic to our operations and certainly to our day-to-day relationships, which is another really important thing. You've got to be pals at the end of the day. You're a team.
Yeah, what a way to build a collaborative team culture. Okay, so that's a negative, but now that you're CMO, what comm structure or process or something else do you use? Because for example, when I interviewed Tom Amate, co-founder and chief executive officer of Intel, one of his lessons was streamline processes to enable efficiency, smooth operations, and get rapid results. And he told the story of how he saw this happen at one of the largest Google advertisers globally. So for you, Millie, okay, you told us about a hard process. Now that you're in the C-suite, what processes, what comm structure, what has worked for you? How have you helped to implement and foster marketing sales collaboration?
Man, so one of the most important things I do when I look at a new job is always try to meet the sales leader and vet out if they're going to be someone who's going to come along for that, because I think that's part of it. You have to have people who want to make this work together. So I'm lucky to be sitting in a spot where I have a really phenomenal CRO whom I respect and admire and who's all in on this process. But one of the things that we do together is really keep, even beyond sales and marketing, all of the C-suite connected. So we have both a quarterly meeting where we get together and kind of look at these numbers and really take time out of the list of Zoom meetings to actually sit down and talk through this and build those human relationships as well. But beyond that, we share the same reports and dashboards. Sometimes it's really simple. It's down to looking at the same numbers together and tracking the same data. And so what you'll find at Hakkoda and IBM Company is that all of our sales and marketing reporting is happening in the same venue. We're in on these, we're talking about it, we're both accountable for it. And that's true when we're presenting to the board, and that's true when we're presenting to, the 500-person company all hands. So there's just a lot of that kind of transparency and joint accountability. That's a really simple answer. I think it does come down to those kind of day-to-day practices, which is they stay attuned. They care about what I'm doing on the sales side. I care about what they're doing and the obstacles. I would say the other concrete process that's been really great for us is we have a director of demand gen internally. He actually has one-on-ones with members of our sales team. Now, eventually you get into a scale issue for that, and we're already starting to kind of come up there and figure out, okay, what's the next way to run this as you keep growing? But that act of having each of our sellers have a direct line to marketing has been really important. It's a way to feed information, talk about their top accounts, get a look at the resources that we have. I think that's the other thing that sales and marketing sometimes fails to do is like marketing's got all these great resources and campaigns. Doesn't matter too much at all if your sellers have no idea that the one pager exists or that you're advertising to this company and they might want to follow up. And then I would say the last piece is really kind of smart triggers and reporting. So we try to bring our kind of prospects, especially where the services business and consulting, we try to bring them to a pretty mature stage of engagement before there's a handoff to sales. But we create triggers along the way that send them notifications via Slack or HubSpot, so that when a contact that they flag, hey, this is a priority company, we can see the contact is the right buyer title. They're getting little notifications about that person's activity. Hey, Jim went and looked at this page and then they downloaded this book, right? Those kinds of little details we found have really been great for one, keeping sales engaged with what's happening on the marketing side, and two, feeding them the kind of insights and information that if they are ready to act on it, allow them to proactively reach out with an actually tailored message.
That's nice because they always get harassed to update the CRM for their touch points. So I think you're kind of showing being a team player and hey, we're going to tell you also about the touch points we're seeing. So of course, that's a nice place to be deeper in the funnel. We're getting all these leads flowing and we're having all these activities. But to get there, we usually have to get some sort of message out into the marketplace. And as you said, as I mentioned in the opening, a brand that says something is more important than saying everything perfectly. Say something. So how'd you learn this lesson?
Man, I think everyone who is still employed as a marketer has been learning this lesson for the last 5 years. It has been absolutely fascinating to watch the maturation of content, even just if you take a platform like LinkedIn. If I go back 5 years, 7 years, the types of video content that you saw on LinkedIn were incredibly polished. They were highly professional. They were basically commercial style videos. If you open up, which of course LinkedIn's got their own version of TikTok now, if you open up videos on that platform today, you're going to get a lot of people very, very casually talking. So it's this complete kind of downgrade in what we expect in terms of like the polish of content, and then tie that with AI and just the absolute saturation of messaging. Like people can create 50 videos out of almost nothing. They may not be 50 good videos, but the number of pieces of content that are out there and the polish that we expect for them has dramatically changed in the last 5 years. I expect that to continue. And what that means for us as marketers is we cannot sit around on our hands waiting for every single video to be perfect as much as we might like to. And it also means that we are competing against more noise than there has ever been in advertising history. This is not, you watch Mad Men and you think to yourself, I'm just going to come up with a phenomenal idea and it'll be perfect and we'll get it out there. The idea still matters, but how you get it out there has changed. And so that's, I think, been a totally different way of coaching design and creative teams. And depending on kind of, the age of how long someone's been in the market, they may have a totally different perspective on that creative side. But as CMO, your responsibility is to get out there and say, hey, this is the message we need to tell. And we've got to come up with a unique way to say that. But then we've got to just push it out as fast as we can because the mind share is going to be gone. The market is saturated with messaging. Nobody needs it to be perfect. You just have to get the message to the right people. And so I think it becomes so much more of yes, your message needs to be good and unique. And then the other critical piece is actually more your data has to be great. The people you're pushing that to should be informed by really, really phenomenal marketing data because we have more access to that than ever before as well.
All right, let's get into that piece of the ads CMO, making sure that message right. How do you engage key stakeholders to make sure your brand is saying the right thing? Right? For example, when I interviewed Rebecca Beesman, the CMO of Guild, one of her lessons was to build a brand that lasts, consider rebranding a team sport. She told stories from throughout her career of how she engaged CEOs, other key stakeholders, right, to make that brand right. So I love the story. I love what you're saying, say something and stuff. But really, like the other thing that's going on other than AI is I think I could hear other marketers, CMOs hearing what you're saying and say, yeah, but if I say the wrong thing, watch out. Like this is going to date this, but Cracker Barrel just put out a logo that looked fairly simple and was the biggest firestorm, of the month until the next firestorm.
Correct.
So yes, I couldn't agree more. As I mentioned, brand advertising, man, so many brands just don't say anything. But part of the reason, in fairness, they don't is they don't want to say the wrong thing. And it seems like such a minefield. So as CMO, Millie, how do you engage the key stakeholders within your ecosystem, your company, whatever, to make sure that you're saying something, but you don't trip on a landmine?
That's a phenomenal question. And man, it is so funny to me because I think the counter to the Cracker Barrel story is Nutter Butter. Have you seen their advertising? It is absolutely insane. You would never believe that was a cookie brand out there advertising. And so I almost feel like what you're up against is if you're too careful and then you make one misstep, yes, you're in a firestorm. And at the same time, if you lean all the way in, you can do almost anything. And so it's that expectation that you build for your audience, I think, is a big piece of that. Now, brand safety is incredibly important. Yes, I think there is a huge minefield out there. There's more people than ever spending their time on the internet just waiting to comment and be angry about something that you said. So I think there's a huge level of, as CMO, you have to be plugged into the market. When I talked about those days when I go hop on the plane and get out in person, that's a huge piece of it for me. I do not think there is a replacement for FaceTime with your customers in the marketplace. The other thing that we do at Hakkoda and with IBM is we lean really deeply into industries. And that too, I think, is really important. So there's going to be corollaries for other businesses. It may not be industry for you, it may be, but you have to find the specific niche and talk to your audience on that particular playing field. So financial services, for example, is a really big market for Hakkoda and for IBM. And so when we go into this, we have had our entire marketing team meeting on a regular cadence with that entire industry team for the entire existence of our company. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to my junior designer or if I'm talking to my content lead. Both of them understand the way that a financial services audience differs from a healthcare audience, different types of titles that they're going to be speaking to, and they can line that message up. So I think it is creating that culture of really, really being attuned to your audience. It's the most important thing that we do as marketers. Now, that doesn't guarantee you'll never make a misstep. I think that's going to happen when you have to push content out fast. I think that we've watched plenty of brands do that. Some have done it really well. If you make a misstep, you pivot quickly, you respond to that public commentary, and you get in front of it. So there are ways to adapt to that. But it's a risk. I don't disagree with that. I just think it's one that we all have to learn how to live with.
Yeah, to use another great quote, sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one, right? So let's get a little deeper into the content you see working now. You mentioned that expertise matters more than ever. So you kind of touched on that a bit by talking about financial service and healthcare. What do you mean by expertise matters more than ever? What do you see working now in content?
Yeah, man, I like comes back again to AI, which I'm sure we're all tired of hearing about and talking about, but it's real, right? When there are dozens and dozens of pieces out there that are written by ChatGPT or by Perplexity, whatever you want to use, there is just a kind of that blanding down of perspective. And you talked about it, blandvertising, which I love.
Thank you. Yeah.
Blandvertising also applies to thought leadership, right? I cannot tell you how many, it might have the right headline and in a way that's even worse. You like click on it and you're like, oh, maybe that's going to be interesting. And you scroll and you scroll and you scroll and it says nothing at all. So digging in and having a perspective, even if you might think, hey, it's a little bit of a hot take. I know there's more nuance to this. I would rather have a strong perspective than a bland take that tries to encompass literally everything. Because the other thing that's happening with content and what I see not working is people are tired of reading. They don't want to go through and read your 5,000 word essay on a new piece of technology. Consequently, they're turning to podcasts. They're turning to other forms of media that might mix in a little bit of entertainment, and they're going to give them something they can sink their teeth into. And so what I see working on the content side is actually content that I think trusts the audience. If I am writing for a CIO, as my team often is, that CIO is going to bring their own nuance. They've been around the block. They're not 5 days into the job. They don't need me to give them all 50 of the like milk kind of toast commentary that I could give them. They want me to give them a fresh take, a hot take that's going to actually give them something to react to and chew on for the next day or so. That's perspective. That's expertise. AI can't do that for you.
Yeah, that's important. I will say this was true in the era before AI. Earlier in my career, worked with IBM and some other big software companies. And there was this idea, CIOs and others would always want to get out and be thought leaders. And I always would say, writing, 80% of writing is having something to say. Only 20% is saying it well. Because sometimes, even then, these very experienced people, they didn't feel comfortable with content. I mean, content was newer back then, but still that's not their expertise. And so they would just, say, okay, write something up or whatever. It's like, no, you really got to probe them when you're working with those thought leaders to really be thought leaders. And like you said, get something out of them. Then the other 20%, okay, a writer can craft it well. But other than that, but to anyone listening, if they're C-level in any other position or high level in any other position, don't just go to a writer and say, hey, create that blog post or white paper, whatever it is. And on the flip side, I've seen, and I don't know if you've seen this too, is there's just the straight up feeds and speeds. So it says a whole bunch of stuff with zero meaning, right? So there's a balance there. But you've talked a lot about AI, and I want to delve into a bit more of a personal level with the AI. How are you navigating your personal brand amongst all this? Right. So, for example, when I interviewed Pratik Shrivastava, the advanced analytics manager at Cummins, one of his lessons came from the CEO of Cardinality AI, who told him, be your own brand. Right. So now every working person, after LinkedIn came about, and even before that, we all every working person knows they should have a brand. But we as marketers, even more so. I've seen so many disruptive changes in our industry. I mean, going online, all these things, but nothing like this, where the technology could possibly replace our roles as writers, as CMOs, whatever it is. And so this brings up this big question where I think people are trying to figure it out. Okay, we know we got to do the right thing for our company brands for sure. But now, what do we do for our personal brands in this era of AI? Have you figured out anything here, Millie?
I don't know that I have all the secrets, Daniel, but I think that asking that question is the right place to start. I think most people who have reached that CMO level are already out there somewhat actively managing their brand, managing their kind of perspective in the marketplace. So I think all the things that we just walked through, and I'm sure many other great lessons that have been shared by other CMOs on this podcast, apply to, how we should be managing our personal brand. So having a perspective, a take on what's coming next, I think is really important. Making sure that you put that out there really matters. And I do come back to, I really think, yes, AI is out there. There's a million things. It's still going to come down to personal relationships a lot of the time. And so I think that's the fun counterbalance to AI for me is we are still human beings. I am still here sitting, talking to you. We're all listening to this together. It's going to be about how we are meeting people in the marketplace and the natural next fit. And so that personal brand can be a benefit to your company. You can be out here kind of sharing a perspective that resonates in the industry and elevates the kind of power and clout of your business. That's phenomenal. Worst case scenario, you're doing something that hurts your brand. But I think that being silent is not really an option for CMOs anymore. You have to be out there kind of commenting on what's happening. And I think that's valuable for your broader team as well. I think that's something not to forget is that I know that our marketing team is looking at this. I'm speaking to other leaders and partners, and we're all learning from how we're approaching the same problems. And so it's about that human discussion that's happening. AI is a fun augment to that, and it's going to help us push out our message. It's going to help inform how we adapt to the marketplace. But having conversations with real people at the end of the day is what it comes down to for me.
Well, in the second half of this episode, we're going to talk about some lessons that Millie learned from those relationships with real people. But first, I should mention something about AI. The How I Made It in Marketing podcast is brought to you by MechLabs AI, the parent company of Marketing Sherpa. Transform your intellectual property into a revenue engine in just days. In just 21 days, you can pilot your first AI-powered product. Learn more at mechlabsai.com. That's MECLABSAI.com from the parent company of Marketing Sherpa. All right, let's talk about some of these people that you learned, some of these human relationships that you learned from, Millie. You mentioned Michelle Sitton, who's a CMO and your former colleague at MedBridge. And you said from Michelle, you learned to build for your audience. How did you learn this from Michelle?
Oh, man. Michelle is a phenomenal marketing leader. And I think that everybody has one person in their career who really drives home what is ultimately a fairly simple truth. So building for your audience is not unusual. And yet to this day, I think it is something that I still see even C-suite leaders sometimes struggle with. It's not unique to marketing, obviously. Everyone needs to be building for their audience. And that's something I spend a fair bit of time coaching my team on, is thinking about, okay, yes, someone is asking a question of marketing. If you were presenting that to me, you throw in a whole bunch of jargon and you can tell me all of our stats and our nitty-gritty reporting. Fantastic. I'll be excited to see it. If I am reporting that to the board of investors and not a single person on there comes from a marketing background, I need to bridge the gap. And certainly if I'm reporting to, a 1,000 person all hands company call, it changes again. And so really, really getting down to that question every single time I create a piece of reporting was something that Michelle really worked with me on. And I think it is just a universal principle that applies to all of marketing. I said this before, but it is our job to know our audience. That is really what marketing is here to do in the business. Sales is here to get in front of them and advocate for our services. Marketing is here to understand them, to feed them content that responds to their thoughts, fears, hopes, dreams. But to do that, we have to be the advocate for the customer. That's who we are at the end of the day as a department. And so that principle that Michelle kind of drove home with me of sitting down and thinking every time I'm creating a readout, every time I'm writing a piece of content, every time I'm making a piece of creative, starting with who is going to use this at the end of the day and why, and what do I want it to trigger for them emotionally? That's super important. And she was such a phenomenal coach and mentor in that arena.
Well, part of that, as we talked about in some of your previous lessons, is that internal communication, making sure you're getting the right messaging across the organization. So I wondered, since Hakkoda has been acquired by IBM, have you learned anything or have any specific examples of how you figured out how to navigate IBM to help build for your audience? So as I mentioned earlier in my career, I was a contractor in IBM doing sales enablement, IBM Rational, and it's big organizations are complex. I mean, IBM was this way. I'm sure others were. Even when you talk about sales, there's not one sales organization. There's multiple sales organizations of different overlapping, ways. And there's so many organizations. So when you come from a smaller company and you go into such a major enterprise, I think part of success is not just the things we typically talk about, CMOs getting the branding right, like we said, the messaging, the demand generation funnel. It's learning, okay, how do I now navigate this much larger organization to, one, get the resources I need to do the right things, to be a team player, but also to make sure they understand what we're doing, how they can help, how we can help. So I don't know if there's any specific stories you can share, Millie. So exciting, I'm sure, Hakkoda getting acquired by IBM. A lot of wonderful things with that, but also comes with that, like, how do you navigate that so you can build for your audience?
Yeah, no, that's a huge change, right? I referenced before, we're sitting around 500 people that are just Hakkoda. IBM is 300,000.
Yeah, all over the world.
If you don't hold me to that, it'll change every single day.
Sure.
But somewhere around that number, they're huge. And they're a fantastic organization. They have over 100 years of legacy in this industry and just this huge, powerful brand. But no, that's a huge piece. And so there are a few things that we do that I think have been really successful. We actually use them with other partners as well. So it wasn't a totally new motion for us. As soon as I kind of knew this was coming down the pipeline, this was one of the very first questions that I started asking was, how do we as a marketing team take everything we're doing, great, and now go show it to 300,000 more people? That's a big ask for a team of 9 internally. So when we kind of sat down, we had a few tools that we highlighted that were like, yes, this is absolutely going to be part of it. I think there's some old tries and trues, email newsletters, always good. You may get high open rates, you may not, depends on the person. But what we really liked was one-to-one advertising. So we have a tool that we use that can push out messaging across Meta. So that's Instagram and Facebook, across search, across LinkedIn, across, Bing, all of the different things, all the different platforms where people are consuming information. It just spams this one message. And you can do it to specific individuals. So we sat down and we segmented and we said, hey, okay, we've got these specific industry messages. We've got these specific campaign messages. We can learn who's kind of owning which accounts and which is going to be relevant for these. And then we can segment it, divide it, and send it to these 30 people get this message. These 60 people get this message. So that's been really fun. But outside of that, working with IBM just opens up a whole new world of resources. So we kind of started talking about audiences and content. IBM has something called the Institute for Business Value, where all they do is research their audience and put out these really phenomenal reports. And so some of the journey for me is just getting plugged in with the right, really incredible marketers at IBM and figuring out, okay, how do we play with this? How do we get access to this data and make it something that we get to use too? So there's a whole big task out in front of us, which is to educate, a few 100,000 more people. And then there's this great big opportunity, which is we've got a brand that's over 100 years old and has such positive recognition. And we've got all these big new resources that we never would have had before.
So there's a lot of good examples. Let me dive into one to make sure I understand it, because this sounds fascinating to me. I hadn't heard this, at least back in the day at IBM. You're using external platforms to communicate to IBMers, which would normally be an internal communication strategy. Is that right?
So, for example, we are using a tool that, let's say you work at IBM. I'm going to say, I know that you own several accounts that are doing SAP analytics work, and I want to get in front of that. I can send you a message on your Instagram and your Facebook and your Google search. And it's, hey, Hakkoda is now a part of IBM. And we have this SAP expertise. Here's a few client case studies. Let's talk about who this might be relevant for. Because that's a huge opportunity source for us now.
That's fascinating. Using external platforms for internal communications. You got to stay creative in this business, right?
You do.
All right. Well, we talk about that bigger team, the bigger IBM team, but you have a specific team as well. And you said that you learned that the success of your team is your success. And you said you learned this from Claire Curlin, a former colleague who's also a CMO. So how'd you learn this from Claire?
Man, I think if you're lucky, you will have a few leaders like this in your career who kind of show you to their core what it means to elevate the people around you. But Claire was a really phenomenal example of this for me. So I think that especially as you kind of get into the C-level, there are a lot of different approaches to leadership. And some of them are really, and it probably depends on the company culture too, but some of them can get focused on, hey, here's all the things I did, me personally. The leaders that I always admire the most are the people who talk about what their team accomplished. And yes, they're there sitting in the background. You know that leader is responsible for that function of the business. But what they spend their time talking about and highlighting is the individuals on their team and their success. Claire is really, really great at that. And she kind of goes through very concrete. So when she has airtime with a board of investors, when she has airtime with other C leaders, that's what I saw her doing so consistently, was talking about what the team was working on. So each kind of C-level leader understood, here's the value this person is bringing on the marketing team. Here's what they're responsible for. And then tying it right back to the business value. And that's something that a leader can do really, really well. And one, I think it's just a brilliant strategy for indicating why you need people on your team. An argument that you sometimes have to have in business is, why are we funding this? What's the value this role in particular is bringing? So that when you go and say, hey, I need additional headcount, everyone is already kind of indoctrinated into this conversation of, yeah, okay, I know what content does because, Zachary runs that for us right now. And here's all the incredible things I know he's been doing because I've heard it all from the marketing leader. And yeah, if we need another person who's going to do more of that, it just makes it way more easy for folks to get invested. And then on the level of the individual, of course, you're helping to accelerate their career. They feel seen and valued. And when they have a conversation with the CEO in the break room, the CEO has something to talk to them about because they know what they've been doing.
Absolutely. And I wonder, so that's a great internal lesson. And I wonder if an external version of that is the success of your customer is your success. And you mentioned many times, you drive way out to that Denver airport, you hop on a plane, you're talking to customers personally. How do you use those conversations? Because I've talked to some marketers who are like, they're helping build the product. They're helping make sure the customer is successful. They're kind of tearing down any internal walls, coming up with, product features and ideas, making sure individual, customers work. And, other marketers they're kind of more focused on maybe their marketing lane, but they're getting case studies or, they're really just understanding usage or specific wording or titles they should focus on or any of that stuff. So I love this. The success of your team is your success. I'm sure the success of your customers is your success as well. So can you give us any specific examples of when you're actually hopping on that plane, actually meeting with customers, what you're doing with that information, how you're using it?
Yeah, man, that is the most important thing. And I love that as like the internal, external version of that lesson. It is the same thing. So when I'm out with customers, I usually am trying to bring on at least one person from my team to also attend that in here. So sometimes that's we're at an executive event and my director of events gets to be there and she's going to hear everything that's happening. She's going to watch what resonates, what lights up their eyes and what doesn't. So there's all these soft things that, I would never say I could just sit down and like write this into an email and they would get it. So more than ever, I am trying to get my team in the room with customers as well. It's not just me. But when it is me by myself, if we're having a closed door conversation, my biggest focus is on those kind of human emotions. What are they excited about? What are they afraid of? What are their hopes? What are they like really, really wishing would happen next? And if I can take those kind of big three things and funnel that back to my team in all of these soft conversations that we have every single week, then I have done my job well. And it's not, yes, I could sit down and talk to you about the deal size and whether it's, growing or shrinking, and all of that is a piece of it. But they can also go look at that in the CRM. What they can't pick out without me sitting there and kind of relaying that information back is the emotional soft responses. And so that's what I focus on when I'm with customers in that room. And that's what I try to feed back to the team. And then beyond that, there is nothing better than getting a customer to sit down for a client story. You have this free reign license to ask them about what went well, what went poorly, what they're excited about, and to craft this story together. So all of that is really useful. And every single member of the team watches those, that's important. If someone has taken the time to sit down and record this with you, I want my entire marketing team spending the 5 minutes to watch what comes out of it. That's really important too.
The reason that's so great, that human element, is I always hear that term business to business, right? It's not really business. It's human beings who work in businesses to other human beings who work in businesses. So hats off to you for, knowing their humanity and trying to learn more about it.
I think we'll all just keep moving more in that direction. As technology advances, that's the value we bring. It's our relationships. It's that understanding of emotion. We're just going to have to lean further and further into it, I think, as the years progress.
That's one thing I agree with AI too, that there's always a pendulum swing. And sometimes it's doing kind of the counterbalance to that pendulum is what's the really successful thing versus going all in on it. Well, we talked about so many different elements of what it means to be a marketer, from your stories, that, teamwork with sales, that learning about your customers. If you had to break it down for us, Millie, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Man, I would say the most important quality of an effective marketer in this day and age is really someone who can adapt quickly and who cares about the client. It's those two things. And that's going to show up in a million different ways as they go through their day-to-day, depending on their role. But technology is changing so quickly. We've said that a million times, but it means there are incredible new tools coming out. I've looked at tools in the last month that I'm like, yes, green light, let's go, let's use it. That 4 months ago, I was saying that wasn't ready. Technology is changing at a pace that I think we've never seen. So people who are curious and ready to adapt quickly and can help surface that new tech and bring it to your team with kind of enthusiasm and a lot of legitimate kind of concern for how it's going to impact the business value, absolutely incredible. Those are qualities that I look for in marketers. I like to say you can learn a lot. That quality of being curious, of wanting to find new things that you can adapt, that's inbuilt on some level. You just need somebody who lives and breathes that. And then the other piece is you've got to have somebody who has that strong sense of empathy, because that's what you're asking them to do. I don't care if you're going through, maybe marketing ops would be what you think is most divorced from that empathy with the client. At the end of the day, we're actually still telling a story with that marketing operations data to our clients, to our internal customers, all of those different groups. So there's nobody who shouldn't be invested in the empathy of that client and user experience. And that's two key traits that I think you just cannot operate without.
Well, I love hearing you say empathy and enthusiasm, because I think that very much sums up the conversation we had and that you brought to us today, Millie. So thank you very much for sharing your career journey, all the lessons and stories from it.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be on.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.